Hello, and welcome to today's Augustana Human Library session. The title of today's book is Judge Not, and this is the Human Books abstract. Many years as a lawyer and then as a provincial judge could make you cynical and closed, or, as in the case of this human book, grow a deep compassion for humanity and its many struggles. From hardened criminals to first-time offenders, this judge has handed down some sentences in the hope that life for others would take a turn for the better. Thank you all for being here today, and welcome, Judge Not.
Okay, well, I'm very surprised to see such a big crowd, and thank you all for joining me. I'm not exactly sure. I suppose some of you are interested in law, and might like some comments about it. I think what I should do is give you a little bit of background, but if you have any questions at any time or you think I'm straying off the topic, just show. I think you can go down and flash a hand and or raise your hand, and I'll try to respond to any questions you have. I think what I've done in the past is I've tried to give a little bit of my background. I'm in my 81st year of life, and actually I was born on the day that World War II started. So I lived through World War II. My parents and my grandparents were immigrants from Denmark, and we're very poor for various reasons. A part of it was the Depression, then the war, then my family, my parents had 5 kids, of which I was the oldest and the first one to go to university. And I'm the only one to go to university among the 5 of us. And I was not a particularly good student. I have learned since going to school that I was an ADHD kid. So here I was, this hyper kid that all teachers had problems with. So none of my teachers in high school expected me ever to amount to anything. But when I was 17, finishing grade 12, my parents moved to Camrose, and I stayed in Edmonton to finish my education. And since things were fairly tough for my parents, I knew that I had to get out, and I applied to join the Air Force. And luckily, I guess I passed the kind of tests the Air Force liked, and I was selected to be to ROTP, Regular Officer Training Program, and I would have my university paid for. There was only one little problem. I didn't have my senior matric. I was missing French 30, and French has always been a bugbear for me, and so I couldn't take the scholarship that I had won. And I went to them and said, I'm sorry, I just can't get my senior matric in time. And could I just join the regular Air Force? I said, fine, sure. So luckily I was selected for air crew, and I became an officer flying, protecting us from the Russians, pretending to shoot down Russian bombers, and having the great time of my life. So I got out of the Air Force after 6 years, and I was 24 years old, and I knew that on my squadrons, on the squadrons I was on, at least half of my squadron mates had university degrees. So I knew that education was very, very important. So when I got out of the Air Force, I drove from Greenwood, Nova Scotia to Edmonton at the beginning of September in 1963. And I showed up at the university. University had already started, but the classes had been going for 3 days. Now, I just showed up there and went up to the Dean of Arts, and the secretary saw me and said, well, you know, you're supposed to apply to come to university. I said, I didn't know that. I said, when I started grade 1, I just showed up at the school and that was it. So uh, I don't know why, but she said, I think you better speak to the dean. So I spoke to the dean of arts, and he looked at my high school marks, which were not an official transcript. They were what I'd received 6 years before in the mail. And he said, you know, you weren't that great a student. I did have a 60 average, you know, but uh, he said, maybe university is not for you. I said, oh, no, that was then. This is now. I'm an adult, 24 years old. The rules shouldn't apply to me anymore because I'm not a kid anymore. And he shook his head and he said, look, sorry, we can't take you. But if you really want to go to university, you get in your car and you drive down to Mount Royal College and you show up there and they'll admit you. So I did. I don't think he believed I would do this. So I got in my car, drove to Calgary. I got there before 4 o'clock, so I got there before they closed. And I showed up, and they obviously knew I was coming. So they handed me a piece of paper. I put down my name, address, and says, show up tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock, and you can take your French 30 and your first year university. Well, I did very well in my university courses, but I'm afraid to say I failed throughout the year French 30. And I thought my university career was over, but I've had some very good encounters with Mr. Bell, and some of you have maybe had some good encounters with Mr. Bell. The French 30 exam was hard, and there was no question that I had failed it. But obviously it was harder for most people. So Mr. Bell, the bell curve, saved me, and I had got a 65 in French, believe it or not. Anyway, I won't go into the rest of the history, but ultimately I go to university and do very well, especially in the same courses that really helped me in law: philosophy, sociology, psychology, history, and courses I loved, and I did very well. And excuse me, university, I could have spent the rest of my life in university, but of course it had to end. And I had started in economics because I wanted to never be poor like my parents. But after taking money in banking and microeconomics, I thought I can't do this the rest of my life, and decided, what shall I do? And I knew my mother would love to have a doctor or a lawyer in the family, but the sight of blood from my experiences in the Air Force weren't such that I was going to be a doctor. So I chose law, not knowing what lawyers did, but it was like winning the lottery. If I had some guardian angel guarding me and sending me to a place, it was to put me into law because I loved it. Law was just great. My career as a lawyer, where I loved working in a small community, and I worked as a lawyer for 22 years here in Camrose. And then I had the opportunity to apply to become a judge. And I was successful in that, and I was a judge for 22 years. So I was able to work until I was 74. I could have worked longer, but I wanted to do other things. So I've had this career in law, which was absolutely wonderful for me. And it might not be everybody's bag, but being a lawyer and being a judge were among the best jobs I could have imagined. And I liked helping people. I like advising people. I like defending people. So it was a great life. I think many people like me, especially people who have ADHD background or dyslexia background, we're not dumb, but we do have some learning problems, and we have problems with, if you're ADHD, you have problems with authority, and you have problems with sitting quietly at your desk. So somehow I was able to overcome that, and despite my poor academic background in high school, my academic background in university was very good, and I did very well. And I think I tell that story because I believe that there are so many people who think, or they haven't had a good experience with school, and they think that they can't do it. But I just want to say that you can do it. If that's what your goal is, we can do most everything, Yeah, fish can't fly except for flying fish, but birds can't swim, but some of them get down there and do a good job. So you can see that you don't have to fit any kind of pattern to be successful. You just have to have some goals. You have to have some perseverance and be prepared to work and do whatever is necessary to get you where you want. Maybe I could just pause here. Are there any questions, or is there any other aspects that some of you might have questions about? Because I'm certainly prepared to answer any questions that you may have about either education or law or any other subjects related thereto. Well, I'll go on and tell you how I dealt with things. I always believed I had a good role model in my father. He was kind to absolutely everybody. And it didn't matter their position or upper or lower. He treated everyone the same. And I tried to go through my life doing the same thing. So when I was dealing with the people who came before me, most of my work as a judge was in adult criminal court. 95% of my work was adult criminal. And I would have serious cases, but I would try to treat everybody, whether they were alcoholics, or whether they were charged with murder, or whether they were charged with a petty crime. I tried to, or a parking ticket. I tried to be respectful to them and treat them well. And I believe it paid off. And I can give you one story. I remember I never liked sending people to jail, but of course, sometimes you have to do that. And at the time, my second wife, who taught music here in Camrose, she was the pianist that accompanied the children's choir at Chester Ronning School. And so when on the second anniversary of the prison that Muscatchee's being opened, I was invited there by, apparently some of the prisoners were encouraged to invite whoever they wanted and to come for this celebration of an open house. And so we go to the prison, and my wife comes with me. And so we're in the prison, and I find out that the two of the prisoners there who I'd sent to prison had invited me because they thought I had treated them fairly. But the interesting part was when we're in one of the big halls there, two young kids come running up to my wife, and they say, "Oh, hi, Mrs. Gady, how are you?" And I was shaking my head. I wondered, what in the heck? These kids know my wife? And it turns out that they had been visiting their fathers in jail. So the world is a kind of a funny place, but it also gave me a chance to speak to their parents and find out that there was, you know, they had actually considered my treatment of them fair. And I think that gave me a lot of confidence that the way I was handling cases was good. And that was just one example. The other thing or my basic idea that I had when I became a judge was that I didn't worry too much about making mistakes. I had a great deal of confidence that while I would do my best, I knew that I would from time to time make some mistakes. And I was supported with those ideas by the fact that I knew that if I made a bad mistake, it could be appealed and another court could hear the case. It could be appealed to the Supreme Court, or what we call the Queen's Bench, or it could be appealed to the Court of Appeal of Alberta, and ultimately it could be appealed to the Supreme Court of Canada. As a matter of fact, I didn't have very many appeals, and most of the appeals I had, I was supported by the higher courts. So I found it very interesting. Any other comments or questions at this stage? Please interrupt me at any time because I can ramble on for a long time. Okay. The other thing I think I can tell you, some of you I know are adults, some of you I presume are students, but one of the things that I will tell you is that if you're going to be successful in any part of life, especially now, I mean, I think the world is changing the changes that are happening right now are essentially earth-shattering. They are like the change when human beings changed from hunter-gatherers to agriculture. That's the level of change I think is happening, and it is happening so rapidly. So the key thing for all of us is to become as educated as we can, to become as resilient as we can in order to meet what is basically a future that is largely unknown. And so you have to be a lifelong learner and hopefully a lifelong reader, but now books can be, you can listen to books too. So there are lots of great audio books, or there are, I mean, I've been, in my retirement years here, I've been reading a lot. I've been watching incredible YouTube videos that are very informative, or watching video programs, or the great courses, learning chemistry that I didn't learn in high school, learning math, learning especially physics and how the nature of reality are things that have given me a lot of joy learning about. But I need some response. So hopefully somebody has, if you'd like to direct the talk in another direction, please let me know. And don't be shy. Okay, well, I'll keep going. And
Harry?
Yep.
I started to type and then I stopped. I have two questions.
Okay.
I think that lots of what us non-legal professional people understand about what a lawyer does is what we see on TV.
Right.
I'm wondering if you can tell us about what you think is accurate and what drives you crazy, because that never happens in real life. And also, you know, now that people have indicated or proven, I guess, in the last 6 weeks or whatever, that working from home is more doable than we might have thought as well. And using technologies like this for learning and teaching have, you know, pros and cons for sure. But I'm wondering if you could imagine court occurring using technology like Zoom instead of having to gather in courtrooms.
In fact, yes, I can tell you right now that even when I was still sitting on the bench, it was just quite often what I would be doing on, say, a Wednesday morning in Camrose. What I would be having people appear before me who had been recently charged or had been recently arrested, whatnot. But if you were arrested, and I might have bail hearings, well, it's very expensive to bring people, say, from Fort Saskatchewan or from Edmonton down to Camrose all the time, although we did that a lot. But toward the end of my career as a judge, I would say certainly in the last 10 years I was a judge, we would be doing a lot of this by CCTV, closed circuit TV, where the person would be held in, say, Fort Saskatchewan, and the bail hearing, the lawyer would be before me, or the lawyer might even be at the prison making his application on behalf of his client before me. So the client was, the person arrested was in, say, Fort Saskatchewan or wherever. It could have been way up north, or could have been in any prison location in Alberta. And they would be brought before me with CCTV, and the application would be made. Now, for trials, the accused had to be before us, and so the person who was running, or if the trial went ahead, the person would be appearing with his lawyer in front of us, and we would run the trial with everybody present. As far as the technology right now, I mean, it has changed so much even since I left. I've been retired now for about 6 years, and a lot of the technology has just exploded. I mean, documents, I think now are being presented online, or they're on your computer. You don't have to have the paper. Briefs can be made online. Even appearances can be made online. So I think you're going to see this, the courts and the legal profession are going to be using this technology more and more and more, but it's happening everywhere. My daughter is a doctor, and through this coronavirus, she sees most of her patients, or she through telephone or online. She has to go, because of the coronavirus, she would go to her office and have to gown up and in protective gear to see the patients that had to be seen. So you're seeing more and more of that happening. And I have another daughter who works in the financial industry, a partner in Deloitte, and she's being forced to work from home, and she's actually loving it, because she said, you know, I used to spend so much time flying, you know, she would sometimes fly from to Montreal, Vancouver, back to Montreal, and then home to Calgary, and at all these meetings. But coronavirus has forced her to be working from home. She says she's more efficient. She gets more done working from home using this technology. She gets to attend many more meetings and deal with the problems while still being home, and she quite enjoys it and thinks she's more efficient. So, and I think we're going to see much more of that. So this coronavirus is going to change that in every area, from medicine to law, everything. So the world is going to be really, really quite different for those of you who are still at university and or are just graduating. It's just a totally new world. Did I answer all the question, or was there some part of that I missed? Oh yeah, you said TV versus being a real judge or a real lawyer. Yeah, it's trials can take, some trials can take a short period, like a few hours, but many trials could take a few years. So you can't squeeze all that into a 1-hour program on TV. And what we see with lawyers on TV is mostly they are in a courtroom scene in the United States, which is very, very different than in Canada largely. Even though we both are common law countries, that means our law is based on precedent and what they call stare decisis. I hope that answers a bit. I can expand on that if you have some questions on that area. Let's see what else was. Oh yeah, there is a question here about women as judges. I graduated from law in 1969. In my class, we had 56 students, of which I think 6 were female. Now I'm told that 70%, up to 70% of students in law are female. So you need to be at least 10 years at the bar with a pretty good CV before you can even apply to be a judge. So it would be 1979, you know, before my classmates, female classmates, would have been eligible to be a judge. Now there were some female judges at the time, but we are seeing now more and more female judges being appointed. And my experience has been that in almost any field, I don't know if I should say this is probably politically incorrect to men, but I think the women who are lawyers and judges, I am so impressed with them. They are just great. Okay. Oh yeah, I was asked about a case that was particularly difficult for me. I don't think, some cases can be difficult, but I decided when I became a judge that I would deal with everything as best I could and make the best decision I could based on the evidence. Now, as a judge, you were not allowed to bring your own biases or knowledge into the courtroom, in the sense of you couldn't base your decision on things that you thought you knew. I hope you can understand that. So even, for instance, just to give you a kind of a silly example, if I knew that Camrose was in the province of Alberta, I could not use that in my judgment to provide me with jurisdiction if the prosecution had forgot to prove that the crime took place in the jurisdiction of Alberta. That is, perhaps in Camrose, which was a city in the province of Alberta. If that wasn't provided in evidence, I would, I don't take this too literally, but that is a kind of an example of the kind of knowledge I couldn't bring into the case. In criminal law, an accused has to be proven guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And there are certain protective rules, and there's certain ways of dealing with things. If the Crown doesn't prove its case, I mean, I may have known or felt very strongly that somebody was guilty, but I couldn't, in my own mind, say that some of the defense arguments didn't raise a doubt in my mind. If they could raise a doubt in my mind, I acquitted. I can give you an example of a case I had when I was first appointed a judge. And I was doing what was called a preliminary hearing on a serious rape case. And it certainly appeared that this young girl had been raped, or that the evidence before me. So as I'm hearing the testimony and seeing the evidence, the bloody jeans, the very fact that there had been clear evidence of a sexual assault of some kind on this young girl. And the evidence came out, and the man accused was allegedly a cousin who had just come out of jail. And because he was in jail being held, the preliminary hearing was moved ahead at a fairly quick pace. So because he was in jail even though he had not yet been convicted. So the accused, who reputation was very bad, and he had committed a lot of crimes and had a very bad record. And clearly he was guilty of a lot of things that people would not approve of, and would probably make him very eligible for jail. In any event, he claimed that he was simply not there, and he had an alibi. Unfortunately, the RCMP didn't check into his alibi, and he did have an alibi, as it turned out. But the thing about it, I think of my own feelings as I was listening to this evidence and hearing what was alleged to have happened to this young girl. And I was ready to hang the guy. It was a nasty piece of business, and my emotions got raised, and I really felt that this guy really deserved to get a long sentence if he was guilty. But I hadn't heard the evidence from the defense. Now, in a preliminary hearing, the defense usually doesn't call evidence, rarely calls evidence, and in this case it didn't. But he had a young lady lawyer, legal aid lawyer, who was defending him. And I regret for the rest of my life that I never remembered her name. But she did the most incredible cross-examination of this young girl. And the girl admitted finally that yes, she had an incident with her boyfriend, and she refused to give her mother the name of this boy. So the mother and the mother's sister, the girl's aunt, had concocted a scheme to put this gentleman who everybody feared in the community away for a while by having her, she refused to admit what had happened and how this incident had happened. So they convinced this young girl to say that she had been raped by this man who was in the docket. And the cross-examination was so good and so gentle that the girl, and of course the lawyer through this found, because you know, through investigation, they found out, she found out this guy had an alibi. It couldn't have been him. There was a rumor that the story had been concocted, and she was able to bring that out. And it was such a beautiful job. Rarely do you dismiss a case on a preliminary hearing, because the Crown only has to show if the crime could have happened. It didn't, you know, as alleged. And I dismissed the charge against the fellow. You know, I don't know what happened after that, but it was one of the things that caused me to recognize that I've got to be very careful not to allow my own emotions to get wrapped up in the testimony, and to listen carefully and unjudgmentally before I make up my mind what had happened. Okay, let's see what else we have here. Was there ever a time when I felt judged as a judge? Well, there was actually. This is again when I was first appointed a judge, and there was a courthouse in Viking at the time, and Viking was not in my usual Ballywack, one of the courts I usually sat in, but I was sent up there for this case. It was a case against someone hunting illegally. And so as we're going on the trial, I ultimately noticed somebody in the back watching what was going on. It was a judge who later became one of the chief judges of Alberta, there supporting his friend who was charged. And I actually convicted the guy, but I did it nervously. So it was kind of interesting. I did feel very judged at the time, and I'm not sure that I satisfied my to be chief judge. Anyway, I hope that gives you some of the ideas of what goes on. One of the questions that was asked here is, were there cases that kept me up at night? Yes, in the sense of, I'll say generally speaking, when I went home, I was able to shut the court off, and I was able to shut my work off. And I think I was very fortunate that I was one of the type of people who could do that, because many judges couldn't turn off their work when they went home. And I think in other professions that happens as well. But I have been fortunate enough that I could, maybe I'm confident enough that, as I said before, if I made a mistake, somebody else could fix it. But yes, there are cases, and you wonder whether you've made the right decision. I had one case, again, early in my career, where certainly a mentally challenged person who was very violent to animals was brought before me, and I gave him a sentence of 2 years in jail. And I really wondered, and you know, I thought he was dangerous to the public, and maybe I should have given him a higher sentence. And the Crown appealed, and he actually did get a sentence of 6 years. And I realized that I was properly overturned there, because I felt I should give a higher sentence, but I didn't. I'm one of those people who believes that prison really generally doesn't help too much, but sometimes we have to keep people protected by just keeping them out of society. Unfortunately, we can't keep them out of society forever. So they always come back into society. So we have to have a better way than our systems that we have now. And perhaps that will come in the future, but putting people in jail rarely works, except to keep them out of a commission for a while. Are there any cases that I've been following? I actually haven't. I've been enjoying my retirement and reading more about science and philosophy than I have about the courts. Are there differences to being a judge in Canada versus the US? Yes, and that is, there's quite a difference. What has happened in the United States is the legal system has become very politicized. And Canada has, in my opinion, one of the most independent courts in the world. When I was president of the Alberta Provincial Judges Association, one of the years that I was practicing. And it was a time when we were suing the Alberta government because they were trying to compromise our independence. And the case was taken to the Supreme Court of Canada and we won. And but I learned there how important independent judges are. And I think judges, from my experience, are in Canada are thought of very, very highly. And most Canadians would believe that when a Canadian judge hears a case, they're going to get a fair trial. In the United States, many of the courts, the judges there, are elected. They're very political. And we now know that the Supreme Court of the United States has become very political and very right-wing from what I can see. And it's kind of scary because it was the last bastion to protect the people from its own government. And that's one of the primary functions of our rule of law, is to protect the individual citizen from his own government, among other things, and from people who harm them. And our laws, I'm afraid, have tended to be made in favor of the wealthy. That's happened throughout history, but we want it to be more and more fair. So the legislature passes the laws, but the judges make the decision as to whether those laws are being obeyed in the way they were intended. And sometimes some people, especially political parties who are in power, do not like the decisions of the judges. But the judges are not, in those cases, I believe, being political. What they're trying to say is, here are the rules as you made them. You can change the law if you want. But as we understand the law, this is how it needs to be interpreted. And so nothing comes, the judges don't make the law in the sense of what they do is they interpret laws that are brought before them where people say, I believe that there's been a misunderstanding. Either the governments have, for instance, the police have charged me falsely. So the court is there to make sure that anybody who's charged with a crime is convicted properly, beyond a reasonable doubt, that they've committed the offense as alleged. Or the governments have passed a law that says they have to consult with, say, Native communities if they're going to encroach on lands that the laws gave to the Native communities. So one of the prime functions, in my opinion, of the court and the legal system is to protect people from their own government and people of power. I hope that answers some of the questions there. Okay, Janice asks if what a typical day was like for me as a judge. Well, I can tell you it was wonderful. But part of the reason it was wonderful that I was living, because I was living in Camrose. And as such, I had one of the unique positions, whereas I had to travel about 2,500 kilometers a month throughout Alberta, but mainly in central Alberta to hear the cases. So courts generally started at 9:30 or 10 o'clock. And so I would have to say I'm going down to Stettler, an hour's drive from here. I would drive down to Stettler, be there usually about a half an hour before court started, or 15 minutes to maybe before court started, see what was on the docket. And I would know basically nothing about what I was going to do that day until I got sitting on the bench. So I was bringing none of my biases in, hopefully. I would see the case for the first time, hear the evidence for the first time if I'm hearing a trial. And then at the end of the day, or when the court was over, when we were finished, it might be 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and I would drive home to Camrose and be home by 3 o'clock. That was great. Sometimes, of course, you're further away. My fellow judges who were in northern Alberta, for instance, they would have to, say, fly up to some of the northern courtrooms, stay overnight in a hotel, be away from home for a period of time. So I was fortunate in that I was here in the central area most of my career. So I was usually within an hour to 2 hours of Camrose when I had to go to court. And I was usually home by, at the latest, 6 o'clock at night. So for me, it was really great. However, you know, like in any job or that you're going to be involved in, if I went to Calgary or Edmonton, you're dealing with, you're in a court building with maybe 50 courtrooms, like in Calgary or Edmonton, and you maybe have 50 judges there. And anytime you have human beings gathered together, and you have very smart people, and some of them have big egos, you know, there's a lot of politics that goes on. There's a lot of in and out. The other thing is, as I said, when I finished my court in, say, Killam or Stettler, I was finished. On the other hand, if I was in court in Wetaskiwin, when I first started my career, we would have up to 5 judges in Wetaskiwin. So if one of the judges had a heavier load and another one finished earlier, you would take over the case. And so you would take a case from another judge to ease the load on him for that day. But it became a real problem for the prosecutors, because then the prosecutor who is dealing with the case has the file, and unless he can come into your courtroom, it's very difficult. So the prosecutors in the early days, they might see that file for the first time, when they said, all of a sudden the judge says, we'll take that case, and he's looking at this file for the first time, and he's trying to run a trial. And that wasn't working so well. So prosecutors got assigned the cases, and even if a judge needed help, there wasn't much you could do if the same prosecutor was in the court with one judge. So I might either be working longer than the other judge, or I might be working shorter because there was no way that I could come in and help. Now, the other thing is, you don't always give judgments from the bench. Now, I tended to be a person who could make my mind up fairly quickly, and most of my judgments I was able to give right away. But there were cases, the difficult cases, especially longer cases where you had heard evidence for a few days, where you would want to reserve and read the transcripts and read the law that's been presented to you and write a judgment. So a lot of judges, especially in the city, wrote a lot of judgments. I mean, if you're writing a 100-page judgment, that you're not going to do that in a couple days. So for a lot of judges who had a tendency to write long judgments, they were very, very busy. Okay. Did I have repeat offenders? Yes, I definitely did. The wonderful thing about when the few cases I did in young dealing with young offenders is that most of the young offenders that came before me never came back. But there was a small percentage in the case, and the same with adult criminals. They were repeat. I kept seeing them over and over and over again, especially alcohol offenses and drug offenses. Those people, you got to know them. Or you would see, for instance, I'll give you an example of one case that I had in Wetaskiwin. I mean, Wetaskiwin has a very serious problem with a number of people who drink too much, who are alcoholics, and are constantly before the courts. And one of these had appeared before me, and I can't exactly remember how it went, but I think he was brought before me, and I let him out on bail, and he was back before me after lunch. And he was back before me for going over to the co-op next to the courthouse and stealing a chocolate bar. And he pled guilty, and the police wanted me to, or the prosecutor wanted me to give him 30 days in jail for that because of his record. And I said, I'm not giving him anything. I said, why didn't you feed him? You let him out just before lunch, and he's hungry and he hasn't eaten. And I let him out. That's the kind of stuff. Yeah, you see. But you see the alcoholics come before you 3 or 4 times driving. You increase the penalties a little bit each time, and eventually send them to jail for 30 days or whatever. And there's not much you can do. I hope you found it fairly interesting. I hope you realize that anybody can be a judge. And if we use our common sense and a little bit of training, I think we can. Okay then, and thank you all for listening.
Well, thank you. And it certainly seems to me that the care and wisdom that you would have brought to that process would have made it a much healthier and more tolerable kind of process for people. So I'm sure they've always appreciated that.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, and I enjoyed speaking to you, and best wishes to all of you, especially during these times. It's not going to be easy the next few years. No, okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye-bye, everyone.